I opened my bedroom door and found another woman sleeping in my bed, her clothes in my closet, her perfume on my pillow. But the real shock came when my own son looked me in the eye and said, "If you don't like it, Mom, you can leave." That moment broke something inside me and rebuilt someone stronger. I stood there in shock, unable to move. My name is Nora Bennett. I'm 56 years old, a retired school teacher, a widow, and a mother who thought she'd seen everything. But nothing could have prepared me for this. When I finally found my voice, I called out softly, "Ethan?" My son appeared in a hallway. My only child, my pride, my reason for breathing. But his eyes weren't the eyes I knew. "What's going on?" I whispered. He looked straight at me, anger flashing where love used to live. "Mom, don't start. She's staying here for a while. Mrs. Helen is going through a tough time. She needs peace." Peace. In my bed, surrounded by my memories. "Ethan," I said, barely able to speak, "this is my room, my bed." He cut me off, sharp, cold, unfamiliar. "Mom, this isn't just your house. We live here too. We pay the bills. You can't act like you own everything." For a moment, I forgot how to breathe. Those words pierced deeper than any knife could. After all the years I spent keeping this home together, every corner, every wall built with love and sacrifice, now it wasn't mine anymore. I tried to reason with him. "Son, this isn't about ownership. It's about respect." But his voice rose again, harder this time. "She's family too. If you can't understand that, maybe you should just leave." And there it was, the sentence that shattered 30 years of motherhood. Maybe you should just leave. I stood there in silence, the kind of silence that burns, the kind that holds back 1,000 screams. My son, the boy I raised alone after losing my husband, had just told me to walk out of the home I built with my own hands. I didn't cry. Not yet. I just stood still, feeling my world tilt beneath me. And in that stillness, I realized something inside me had changed forever. There are moments in life when sound disappears, and all you can hear is your own heartbeat. That was me, standing in the middle of the hallway, suitcase still by the door, my son's words echoing in my head. "If you don't like it, you can leave." Over and over again, like a sentence I couldn't unhear. I looked around the house, the photos on the wall, the flowers on the table, the tiny handprints still fading on the staircase from when Ethan was little. Every corner whispered memories. This was the home I built with my late husband, Michael. He used to call it our forever place. And now it felt like it no longer belonged to me. I wanted to shout. I wanted to remind Ethan who I was, the mother who stayed up all night when he had fevers, the woman who sold her wedding jewelry to pay for his college, the one who held his hand the day his father died. But I didn't say a word, because sometimes silence carries more truth than anger ever could. I bent down, picked up my old travel bag, and walked slowly down the stairs. Each step felt heavier than the one before. This was the same staircase where Ethan took his first steps. The same one where he tripped and cried until I kissed his scraped knee. Now I was the one hurting, and no one was there to catch me. At the door, I paused for a moment. I looked back one last time at the home that had been my whole world, and I whispered softly to myself, "You wanted me to leave, my son, so I will. But you'll remember this silence one day." I stepped outside. The air was colder than I expected. The sound of the door closing behind me felt like the end of a chapter I wasn't ready to finish. I walked down the street with nowhere to go, only a suitcase and a heart full of memories that suddenly didn't belong anywhere. People I knew waved from their porches. Mrs. Parker from across the street, Mr. Lewis from the newspaper stand. I smiled back, pretending everything was fine. But inside, I was breaking. And yet, beneath the pain, a quiet voice whispered something I hadn't heard in years. "You're stronger than this, Nora." When you lose everything in one moment, you stop fearing what comes next. I walked through the town aimlessly, not knowing where my feet were taking me. The streets were the same. The bakery where Ethan used to buy cookies after school, the park where Michael and I used to sit on Sundays. But I was no longer the same woman. I sat down on a bench near the fountain, the same bench where I once taught my son how to tie his shoelaces. That memory hit me like a wave. The small hands, the proud smile, the laughter that used to fill our lives. Now there was only silence. I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone. My hands were trembling. There was only one person I could call, Mr. Collins, my late husband's lawyer and an old family friend. He answered on the second ring. "Nora?" His voice was calm, familiar. "Mr. Collins," I said softly, "I need your help." There was a pause. That heavy pause when someone hears pain behind your words. "What happened?" he asked gently. I took a deep breath. "I have people in my house who shouldn't be there. I need to give them 24 hours to leave." He hesitated. "Are we talking about your son and his wife?" "Yes." My voice didn't shake. It surprised even me, how calm it sounded. "How soon do you need the papers?" he asked quietly. "Today. Right now." For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the wind moving through the trees and the fountain splashing nearby. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of understanding. "I'll prepare everything. Where can I find you?" "At the Maplewood Hotel, room 12. When I hung up, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Control. Not anger, not vengeance. Just quiet control. The sun was setting, painting the sky orange and gold. I looked up, whispering softly to Michael. "You built that house with your hands. I kept it with my heart. And now I'll protect it with my strength." That evening, I checked into the small hotel, clean, modest, with the faint smell of lavender. I sat on the bed, still in the clothes I'd worn all day. For the first time since Ethan's words, I allowed myself to cry, not from weakness, but from release. And when the tears stopped, I whispered to myself, "He took my home away today, but tomorrow I'll remind him who it really belongs to." The next morning, the sky looked too peaceful for what was about to happen. A clear blue day, sunlight pouring through the curtains of my hotel room. It almost felt wrong, like the world had no idea how broken I was. At exactly 8 o'clock, there was a knock on my door. When I opened it, Mr. Collins stood there, neat suit, briefcase in hand, the kind of calm you only see in people who've seen too many storms. He handed me an envelope. Inside were the legal papers, clean, crisp, and heavy with meaning. "Are you sure about this?" he asked quietly. "Yes," I said, meeting his eyes. "More sure than I've ever been." We drove to the house in silence. Every turn of the wheel brought back a memory. Laughter from the kitchen, birthdays in the yard, the echo of Michael's voice calling my name. And then we were there. My home. The garden I planted with Michael was still blooming. Bright marigolds, stubborn roses that refused to die. It was strange how beautiful everything looked while my heart was still bruised. Mr. Collins knocked on the door. 3 firm knocks. Moments later, Diana opened it. She looked surprised, her expression shifting quickly from shock to discomfort. "Nora, we weren't expecting." But before she could finish, Mr. Collins stepped forward, polite yet professional. "Good morning. I'm Mr. Collins, Mrs. Bennett's attorney. We're here to deliver a legal notice." Behind her, Ethan appeared. Messy hair, sleepy eyes, confusion turning into frustration. "What's going on?" he asked. Mr. Collins extended the envelope toward him. "It's an eviction notice. You and your family are required to vacate this property within 24 hours. Silence, the kind that feels heavier than words. Ethan grabbed the papers, scanning through them, disbelief washing over his face. "Mom," he said, finally, his voice cracking. "You can't be serious. Are you really kicking us out?" I looked at him. My son, the boy who once ran to me every time he scraped his knee, the man who now saw me as a burden. And with a calmness that even surprised me, I said, "No, Ethan, I'm not kicking you out. I'm reminding you whose house this is." Diana gasped. "You can't do this, Nora. Where will we go?" I turned to her and said softly, "You should have thought about that before giving my room to your mother." That silence again, this time sharper, cutting through the morning air like glass. Behind them, I saw Mrs. Helen slowly walking down the stairs, wearing my robe. Her eyes met mine, and in that moment, she didn't look ashamed. She looked victorious. "What is going on here?" she asked. I took a deep breath, standing straighter. "What's going on," I said, "is that you have 24 hours to pack your things. Because I may have left this house quietly, but I'm not leaving it behind." Mr. Collins placed a hand on my shoulder, a silent sign that it was enough. We turned to leave, but before I stepped out the door, I looked back at my son. He wasn't shouting anymore. He was just standing there, frozen, the papers trembling in his hands. I wanted to tell him that I loved him, that I didn't want this fight, but I couldn't. Because sometimes a mother's love has to look like strength, even when her heart is breaking. By noon, the whole town already knew it. In small places, news travels faster than wind. especially when it carries heartbreak. Did you hear Nora Bennett gave her son an eviction notice? Some said it in shock. Others said it with quiet pride. I sat in my hotel room, still staring at the empty cup of coffee on the table, trying to make sense of what I had done. Had I really just evicted my only child? Part of me wanted to fall apart. The other part whispered, "You finally stood up for yourself." The phone began to ring. One call, then another, then another. Each voice on the other end carried a piece of kindness I didn't know I needed. "Nora, sweetheart," said Mrs. Parker, my old neighbor. "If you need a place to stay, my house is open." Then came Mr. Lewis, the man who ran the corner shop for decades. "You taught my son how to read, Mrs. Bennett. If you need anything, food, money, you name it, you have it." Their words felt like soft blankets being placed over an old wound. And one by one, more calls came. Rose, my colleague from school. Carol, the baker who'd lost her husband years ago. Martha, my next-door neighbor for half a lifetime. They all said the same thing in their own ways. You are not alone. And for the first time since walking out of that house, I started to believe it. Because I had spent my whole life giving, teaching, helping, fixing, and I had never noticed how many hearts I'd quietly touched along the way. The next morning, there was a soft knock at my door. When I opened it, I found a box of pastries from Carol's bakery, still warm. A note rested on top. "For strength, not sweetness," by Carol. I smiled for the first time in days. Because while my home was filled with anger, the world outside it was filled with compassion. I looked out the window of my hotel room at the small town I'd lived in for 30 years. The church bells ringing, children running past the fountain, neighbors chatting at the flower stand. It was still the same place I'd always known. But now I saw something I'd forgotten. I didn't just belong to that house. I belonged here. And maybe that's what Ethan had never understood, that I wasn't alone, that I had roots far deeper than the walls he told me to leave behind. I thought the storm was over, but the truth had just begun to surface. It was late evening when someone knocked on my hotel door. When I opened it, I saw a familiar face. Monica, my neighbor from across the street. Her eyes looked nervous, as if she wasn't sure whether to be there or not. In her hands, she held a brown folder, thick, sealed, and trembling slightly. "Mrs. Bennett, I think you need to see this." She let me in, and we sat down by the small window, the streetlight casting long shadows on the walls. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. Then she took a deep breath. "I didn't want to get involved," she said, "but I've seen things, heard things." She slid the folder across the table. I hesitated before opening it. Inside were printed screenshots, messages, emails, voice notes. At first, I didn't understand. Then I saw the names: Diana, Mrs. Helen, Ethan. The first message was from Diana. "Once my mom moves in, Nora won't last a week. Ethan will take my side and the house will be ours." Another one read, "She's too soft to fight back. Just act innocent. She'll walk out on her own." I stared at the words, my heart pounding in my chest. Every message was a piece of a plan, months in the making. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't about space or family. It was manipulation. Monica looked at me, tears in her eyes. "I didn't want to believe it," she whispered, but I couldn't stay quiet anymore. I sat back in the chair, silent. It wasn't anger that filled me. It was something colder, deeper, a quiet ache that spread through every corner of my body. All this time, I thought my son had changed, but now I realized he had been changed. I traced my fingers over the paper, each word, each message. It was like holding the evidence of a broken heart. After a long pause, I said softly, "Thank you, Monica. You did the right thing." She nodded and stood to leave, but before she walked out the door, she turned back. "Mrs. Bennett, Ethan deserves to know. He should see this with his own eyes." When she left, I sat in silence, staring at the folder on the table. The hum of the streetlights outside was the only sound in the room. She was right. Ethan needed to see the truth, not from gossip, not from anger, but from his own mother's hands. I picked up the folder and held it close to my chest. For the first time since this nightmare began, I knew exactly what I had to do. Tomorrow, I would go back to that house, and this time, I wouldn't leave empty-handed. Morning came heavy, the kind of morning that feels like a test. I didn't rush to get ready. I took my time, buttoning my blouse, tying my hair, and staring at my reflection. My face looked older, yes, tired, worn, but behind the lines, there was something new. Strength. I picked up the brown folder from the table, the same one Monica had given me, and held it close, like a shield. Then, I called Mr. Collins. "It's time," I said. He didn't ask questions. He just said, "I'll meet you there." The drive to my house felt longer that day. Every street looked familiar, but somehow different, like everything had shifted since the last time I walked away from that front door. When I arrived, there were cars parked outside, more than usual. Through the window, I could see Diana's relatives, Mrs. Helen, and a man in a suit I didn't recognize. The air around the house felt tense, like it already knew a storm was coming. Mr. Collins stepped out of his car, straightened his tie, and gave me a reassuring nod. "Remember," he said softly, "you don't have to raise your voice to be heard." I smiled faintly. "I know," I said. "I've learned that the hard way." We walked up to the door. When I knocked, Diana opened it, her smile tight, her eyes sharp. "Well," she said, pretending to be calm, "you're back sooner than expected." Not back, just here to finish what I started. Inside, Ethan stood by the stairs, his face pale but defiant. Beside him was Mrs. Helen, and on the couch sat a lawyer, clearly hired to intimidate me. Before anyone could speak, the man in the suit stood up. "Mrs. Bennett," he began, "I represent your son and his wife. According to this document," he held up a paper, "you signed over partial ownership of this house 2 years ago. It's legally theirs now." He placed the document on the table like a weapon. For a second, I couldn't breathe. I remembered signing something years ago, but I hadn't realized what it was. A small favor, a routine paper, Diana had called it. I looked up, my voice calm. "So, that's how it's going to be." Diana crossed her arms. "You left the house, Nora. You gave up your place. We're just protecting what's ours." Mr. Collins glanced at me, silently waiting for my cue. I reached into my bag and placed the brown folder on the table, slow, deliberate, like laying down a card no one expected. "You said you're protecting what's yours. But tell me, Diana, what about protecting the truth?" I opened the folder. One by one, I spread the printed screenshots across the table. Each message, each plan, each cruel word. Diana's smile faded instantly. Ethan frowned, confused. "What is this?" I didn't answer. I just pointed at the page with his name on it. "Read." He leaned over, his eyes moving from line to line. "Once my mom moves in, Nora will leave. Ethan will side with me. The house will be ours." His hands began to shake. The room fell silent except for the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. Diana stammered, "Those messages are taken out of context." Ethan turned to her, his voice trembling. "Out of context? You planned this? You used me against my own mother?" Mrs. Helen stepped forward. "Ethan, don't let her twist things." But Ethan shouted for the first time that day, "Enough!" He looked at me, eyes wide, wet, broken. "Mom, what have I done?" I didn't say a word. I just looked at him, and in my silence, he saw everything. The love, the hurt, the disappointment, the forgiveness. For the first time, it wasn't my voice that spoke. It was the truth itself. For years, I thought I knew what heartbreak felt like, losing my husband, watching my son drift away. But that day, watching Ethan's face as the truth sank in, that was a different kind of pain. The kind that doesn't just break you, it empties you. He stood there, holding those papers, his own wife's messages printed in black and white. His lips parted as if to speak, but no words came out. It was like watching a child realize the monster he feared was real and living right beside him. Ethan turned to Diana, his voice barely a whisper. "You made me believe she hated you? That she wanted to push you away?" Diana's voice trembled. "Ethan, I just wanted us to have our own space. I didn't mean..." But he interrupted, louder now. "You didn't mean to? You planned it. You said she'd walk away if your mother moved in. You..." He stopped mid-sentence, as if the words themselves cut too deep. He turned toward me. "Mom?" His voice broke. "What have I done to you?" The room fell still. Even the clock on the wall seemed to stop ticking. I wanted to run to him, to hold him like I used to when he scraped his knees as a boy. But I stayed still, not out of pride, but out of pain. Because love shouldn't always have to be the first to move. Diana stepped forward, desperate. "Ethan, she's turning you against me." But Ethan's eyes were cold now. "No, Diana, you did that yourself." For a long moment, there was silence. A silence filled with truth, regret, and the heavy sound of realization. Diana grabbed her purse, tears running down her face. "Fine, you choose her, Ethan. You always will." She turned to me before leaving. Her voice dripped with bitterness. "You win, Nora. You always had to." And just like that, she walked out. Mrs. Helen followed her, silent and ashamed. The door closed with a sound that felt final, like the end of a storm that had destroyed everything in its path. Ethan stood still, staring at the door, his shoulders shaking. And then, like a child again, he turned to me. He took a slow step forward, then another, until he was standing right in front of me. He fell to his knees and whispered, "Mom, I'm sorry." That's all it took. All the anger, all the pride, all the silence. It melted in that one moment. I knelt down and placed my hand on his cheek. He looked up at me through tears, and I said softly, "I know, my son. I know." We cried together, not out of weakness, but out of release. Because forgiveness isn't about forgetting. It's about freeing yourself from the weight of what you can't change. That day, I didn't get my old home back. I got something better, the truth. And sometimes, that's all a mother really needs. The house was quiet again. Not the tense, suffocating quiet that once filled these walls, but the kind that feels like peace after a storm has passed. Diana and her mother moved out the next day. No shouting, no drama, just the sound of boxes closing, doors creaking, and footsteps fading away. And when the last car drove off, I stood by the window and let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding for years. The house finally belonged to me again, but more importantly, so did my peace. Ethan stayed behind. He spent the next few days fixing everything he'd once ignored. The broken drawer, the leaking tap, the old picture frame that had fallen years ago and never been replaced. He didn't say much, but his actions spoke louder than words ever could. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the garden fence, I found him sitting on the porch, staring at the marigolds his father had planted long ago. He looked older, quieter, but softer somehow. "Mom," he said, his voice calm, "I don't know how to make up for what I did." I sat beside him, watching the light fade into orange. "You don't need to make up for it. You just need to remember it." He nodded slowly, tears glistening in his eyes. And in that silence, something healed between us. Not perfectly, not completely, but enough. Days turned into weeks. The house felt different now. Lighter. No raised voices, no bitterness echoing down the hallway, just the soft hum of the clock, the smell of fresh bread in the oven, and the quiet comfort of forgiveness. Sometimes I'd catch Ethan watching me from across the room, like he was still making sure I was really there. And every time I'd smile, because yes, I was still here, still standing. Still me. I learned something through all of this, that love, no matter how deep, needs boundaries. That a mother's heart can forgive, but it should never forget its own worth. One evening, as I closed the curtains, I caught my reflection in the window. I looked tired, yes, but peaceful. And I whispered to myself, he thought my silence meant surrender, but he forbought. Sometimes silence is the sound of strength. Some storms don't destroy you. They wash you clean. And when they pass, you realize peace was never about keeping everyone close. It was about learning to keep yourself safe.